Okay, and welcome to week 3 of our weekly webinars. This week we're going to be looking at strategies for fat loss. So if you haven't watched week 2, which was the basics of fat loss, I'd probably recommend having a quick look at that because this will make a lot more sense when you do, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the basic science of it from last week and how can we implement strategies or ways of achieving that fat loss, okay? So this little picture sums up the term behind this strategies. Like there's many different ways to get us to our end zone of fat loss, okay, but just make sure you have an understanding that what we are trying to create is the same thing. We are trying to create a calorie deficit within the body, okay? So like I said, strategies is just one of these roads. That's all it is, okay? A road suitable for me might not be suitable for you, might not be suitable to your cousin or to your aunt, but we're all going to do the exact same thing within the body, and that's create a calorie deficit. So that's really important to understand first of all. And like I said last week, it goes a bit more in depth around the exact how that calorie expenditure actually works and how we can tip that balance in our favor. But that's all we're trying to create, okay? So there's many different ways of getting there. If one way or one method, one strategy does not work for you, don't get too bogged down, okay? It's not the end of the world. There is many ways of achieving this, okay? That's why I think that nutrition approaches, they should be individualized for the most part, and of course the person should be educated on what exactly is happening, and that way you can make decisions that are most suited to yourself. It's kind of one of the reasons that I'm not a big fan of meal plans, is because it's like we're taking this very fixed route, and what happens if like deviations come to it? Are we able to manipulate off, basically? So our first one really, right, is going to be calorie counting. Okay, so for anyone that's been involved in training or watching their diet for a while, they'll have heard this term. Okay, and calorie counting is the most accurate and flexible method. Okay, and I think it's really informative as well. So when you log it into MyFitnessPal, you'll start to see the exact ins and outs of the food that you're actually eating. Okay, so there is a lot of benefits to it. If you simply create a calorie balance, you are going to lose weight. It's physically impossible for you not to lose weight. Now, some of the drawbacks include, this if it fits your macros type diet, whereby, like, if we just say you set a calorie target of say 1600 calories, but you could have that 1600 calories be made up of 3 or 4 Mars bars, and you can see how that it would still fit the calories for the day, but it's just the nutrient quality will be far lower. Okay, so that's the biggest drawback, that it doesn't really take into consideration the quality of foods you're taking. Okay, but if your calories are below or in the range to lose fat, you're going to lose fat. And that's what I think the big drawback is to calorie counting in general. And also it can create an unhealthy relationship with tracking, so that people become obsessed with it and won't eat food unless they can track it. So this kind of thing is just very anti-social at times, and that's not the case for everyone. Some people are, they have a good relationship with it, and they can blend it quite well in social situations. Others do not. I guess that's the case with anything really, I suppose, not to become overly obsessive with it as we go along. So if it is a method you want to do, okay, so what you got to do first is you got to establish your base level of calories. Okay, so you could do this by just tracking yourself for a sustained period, so anything from 7 to 10 days, and from that get an average. Okay, so you kind of see some patterns popping up in your weekly diet. Or the other option is to use a calorie calculator. But just bear in mind, like, these can vary in accuracy from company to company. I personally like the Sigma Nutrition one. I think it's probably the most accurate, and I would be a big fan of Daniel Lennon's stuff anyway. So I think that would probably be if you were to use a calorie calculator method, I'd probably use the Sigma one, which is free. Okay, that you'll put in if you want to have a fat loss, and your calories essentially will be spurted out to you, and you can use them then. Okay. So then once you establish your calorie requirements, you want to put together a fat loss plan from that. okay, which is generally creating a calorie deficit of 500 calories a day or 3,500 calories a week, okay? So why that number? 3,500 calories is the equivalent of a pound of fat, which is like a healthy, and it kind of goes in the guidelines of how much fat we should be losing per week, okay? So it's probably the most sustainable, adherable. It's it's not going to create a massive change in our day-to-day diet. Like we could go hard and say, right, we'll do 1,000 calories a day less. You would lose 2 pounds a week, but it's just not sustainable. It's probably too much of a shock to the body. So yeah, when you use your calorie calculator, it'll probably give you an option of going kind of extreme in the diet or just more moderate. It's up to yourself. I would probably be always of the opinion of more of a moderate approach. Bar you got something coming up that's really important that you need to be extreme on it, I would go with the kind of 500 a day. That seems to be the most attainable for people. So with counting calories, lads, you have to be really accurate and thorough on your tracking. So you can't like mismeasure stuff or excuse the results. You can't be like tracking one day and not tracking the other. You got to be consistent and accurate with all of it, and you just gotta play ball with it. Logging into MyFitnessPal is probably the best method. It's got the most amount of foods on it. It's easy to scan. They got this barcode scanning option, which is really helpful, and it just makes your life really easy. So yeah, to wrap up on counting calories, it is the most accurate. It is going to work for you. The drawbacks doesn't really take into account the quality of the food you're having, can create unhealthy relationships with tracking if you become overly obsessed. They're the big two for me anyway, okay? But yeah, it is probably something worth looking at if you've never tried it before. It's foolproof. It will definitely work as long as you're being honest with it, okay? Does everyone need to count calories? Absolutely not. Nope. Do not need to be counting calories. Most people, and we'll talk about the next two in a second, but most people from just looking at the portion control will lose weight quite easily, okay? So our second one is going to be portion control. And this, more often than not, is the easiest method to go with. Okay, so using your hand, which you've heard us talking about before, like it's so simple to understand. It's very effective. Like I said, it's probably the one I'd recommend the most. Now, the only drawback is you do need a kind of understanding of macronutrients. You need to know what a serving of protein is, what carbs is, what fats is. Vegetables is straightforward enough. But like, if I was to give you a slice of brown bread, would you be able to tell me if it's a protein, a carb, or a fat? If I give you a chicken fillet, would you be able to tell me is it a protein, a carb, or a fat? So you need to have a general understanding of the 3 macronutrients yourself. That's the only thing, okay? And to be honest, most foods are a kind of a hybrid of macronutrients. You get like protein powder, which is just straight protein. Most of them have like bits of each of the 3. Like for example, milk would have a fairly even balance of proteins, carbs, and fats, so it can be hard to distinguish there. But for the most part, this works really well, especially for your bigger meals. Okay, so for example, if I'm having chicken, rice, some veg. Okay, so my chicken would be like, a serving of protein is 1 palm, carbs would be 1 cupped hand, veg would be 1 fist, and we'll just say the skin on the chicken, which usually has fat, and that would be thumb, so roughly about thumb size. Okay, so you can see how it works pretty well for like big meals as such. And again, depending on your goals, you would just manipulate them ever so slightly. So for example, if someone was trying to put on a bit more muscle, they might look for 2 servings of protein per meal. Okay, or if a person's doing a lot of training at the moment, they might look for 2 servings of carbohydrates per meal. Something along those lines. But for a general balanced diet, the bulk of your meals should be made up of the portion control or the hand guideline. Super simple. Like your hand is proportionate to your body. As it says here, it never changes and it's always with you, making it a really good tool for measuring food and nutrients. It's foolproof. It takes the thinking out of it for you, takes the stress of having to log stuff in through your phone. You'll simply just look at your hand and it gives you a good gauge. Okay, why I think portion control is also really kind of popular or really effective, especially in an Irish scenario, is Irish dinners tend to be really big. I don't know if anyone ever eaten on different countries or across the continent. The portion sizes are much smaller. Irish dinners, typically an Irish Sunday dinner, they're quite big portions. So if this can help tailor that starting off. Like, you may never need to change any of the foods you're eating if all you did was manipulate the portion control. Okay. Again, I think that alone is an important thing, that you can kind of eat away what you're eating, just reduce or adapt the size ever so slightly, and you can still lose fat off it. So that's portion control. Okay, and then our third option, which is going to be intermittent fasting. Okay, fasting in general, really, to be honest. So intermittent means we do go through periods of fasting and periods where we're not fasting. So the most common method is what I have up here, the 16-8 method, or the lean gains method it's called. So where we start eating around 12 o'clock and we finished around 8. Some people do like 10 to 6. You could do 2 to 10, 2 p.m. 10 p.m. that is. You could do 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or whatever it is. There's no really like hard and solid rule as to what it is. Okay, but we just want to have portions of the day where we're not eating and portions where we are. So if you look at the 16-8, it's a 2:1 ratio. We're not eating for twice the amount of time we are eating. Okay, and as a byproduct of that, you are going to eat less food and lose weight. You'll put yourself into a calorie deficit and you will lose weight as a result. Okay, again, it's simple. You just don't eat your breakfast and you stop eating at 8 o'clock in the evening. It's pretty simple. Personally, I think like 3 meals works really well. So what's something at 12, something around 3 or 4, and something around 8. That tends to work pretty well for most people. But again, just look at your scenario. Try during those 3 meals not to overly indulge. You're going to be a bit hungrier than normal. That's to be expected, but just don't go too crazy on it. Otherwise, you kind of outdo the non-eating part. From a digestive system point of view, it's really good that we give our digestive system 16 hours of not eating. Okay. Now again, these numbers are just ballparks. You could do 14-10. What would be the risk with that? Would be that you may have an extra meal, which might not put you in as much of a calorie deficit. Okay. You could do 12 and 12. Again, that's just an extra couple of hours where in your head you can eat. Okay, whereas 16-8 seems to work really well, where I can start eating at 12 and I can have to stop at 8. That's just a hard rule on that, and you cut it off. Okay, so some other approaches to fasting are like a weekly fast. So 1 day a week where we don't eat at all. Okay, so it might be like a Sunday. You do not eat for the full day. Okay. Another method is the alternate day fast. So you would eat on day 1, don't eat on day 2, eat on day 3, don't eat on day 4. Again, you have to ask yourself, like, are these long-term approaches? Probably not. I know they are they can be common enough, but they just are extreme. Like, you will lose fat, but you will suffer, because they are going to be quite tough. Like a full day without eating, like a 24-hour fast is very doable, but the alternate day fast to me does seem a bit extreme, and probably unnecessary for most people. The 16-8 I think is a real good long-term approach. 3 meals a day, cut off at 8 o'clock. That's when most people tend to slip up, and that's, to me, looks like that's a real simple method of eating. Don't have to be overly detailed on the foods we eat during that time. 3 meals, 3 healthy meals, and away you go. So yeah, I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. Anyone who watched Joe Rogan's show will know he's a big fan of fasting as well, and he goes through interviews some really interesting people around the idea of intermittent fasting. So just to finish up with here, so we just got some other methods we want to look at. So the first 3 diets we've looked at they're not diets, they're strategies, ways of doing things, and the next couple that are coming here. They all do the same thing if we lose fat. They create that calorie deficit. So it's important not to forget that. That's all we're doing. We're creating that calorie deficit, just different methods or strategies of doing so. Okay. So the first one, the RTB 2.5 diet. This is an idea I had, and I've tried it out, and it works pretty well. It's so it comes from the one just below it, the 5-2 diet. So the 5-2 diet means that we eat really clean and like in a calorie deficit for 5 days, and then we have 2 days where we are far more flexible. So like eat really good Monday to Friday, like really low on the calories, and then you let yourself kind of go Saturday and Sunday. Now it just means the first 5 days have to be really strict. And the other 2 days, yeah, you got room to play with. So the problem I seen with that was that 5 days in a calorie deficit, like a really hard calorie deficit, was hard for people. Um, and the 2 days of eating what you want or drinking what you want just meant that we piled back on the weight again. So it was like going around in circles. So the RTB 2.5 is for 2 days, and half of the third day you're going to be really strict in your diet, and for the second half, that third day, you allow yourself a bit of wiggle room. You allow, one or two kind of treats in inverted commas or something outside of the plan. Okay, so for example, it'd be Monday, Tuesday, really strict in a calorie deficit. Wednesday, you get your breakfast, your lunch is really good, and then your evening meal is, something outside of the classical healthy diet. Okay, and you repeat that process week on week, day on day. So 2.5 days calorie deficit focused, the other half not so much. So I just think that it limits damage control. Like, the person can see the reward an awful lot sooner, and when they do break out, it's not for 2 days, it's for a half a day. So really only 1 or 2 meals, which isn't that bad. Okay, so yeah, that's the RTB 2.5 diet. Again, we're looking to create a calorie deficit, and that's how we're trying to do it. The 5-2, as I just spoke about, is 5 days of hard dieting followed by 2 days of more leeway. There's no real limitations on it. As I said, my own thoughts on it would be that 5 days is hard to get right, and the 2 days at the weekend can be, you can kind of go off the handle and outdo the good 5 days. The ketogenic diet is where we primarily use fat for fuel. It was really popular there about 2-3 years ago. I actually tried it for a while. I found it was really good for like brain clarity and just freshness and energy. But it was, as we'll talk about in a second, it just wasn't sustainable for me. So yeah, using the main fuel source is going to be fat within the body, essentially very low carbohydrates and very moderate levels of protein. Okay, so our bodies become kind of fat burning machines essentially. Paleo diet, carnivore diet, vertical diets, similar things, lads. You're going to see people that do really well off these diets. You're going to see people that hate these diets. People that lose fat off these diets, whether it be paleo, carnivore, vertical, it's all the same thing that's happening. Carnivore is the one that's kind of, it's trendy right now. It's primarily meat. Vertical is something very similar. It's a red meat and eggs, salt. What else is in that? Just a certain type of carb, because it's like sweet potato or something. But for the most part, the last two diets strive off like meat and eggs, pretty much. So again, look, there's people that will look at that and go, that's lunacy. There's people that will look at a vegetarian or a vegan or paleo, whatever it is, and go like, that's crazy. That doesn't work. The couple of questions on the right here, what it really comes back to, and it's what you as an individual have to ask yourself: is what I'm doing adherable? Like, can I stick to it? So, for example, is it adherable? Is it sustainable? Kind of the same question, right? But basically, can you see yourself doing it a long time? So this comes back to me on the ketogenic diet. Like, I was eating probably like a steak every day. I was eating different foods to my family and stuff like that, and to me that wasn't sustainable long term. Number one, financially, buying a T-bone steak every day is bloody expensive. A lot of coconut oils, a lot of stuff just high in fat. It was pricey, and that wasn't going to be sustainable for me long term. And therefore I wasn't going to adhere to it. I wasn't going to stick to it. I was kind of dipping in and dipping out of it. So like, adherable, just like, make sure you're all in on it, whatever you're doing. Okay, do I enjoy it? Okay, like, no one loves restricting themselves from nice things, and if they tell you to do it, they're bullshitting. There's going to have to be a part of it where you don't particularly love it, okay, but for the most part, is it enjoyable? If every meal is just white rice, plain chicken and broccoli, there's something seriously wrong, because no one in the world would enjoy that. So there has to be aspects to your diet that you say, yeah, do you know what, I really enjoy that. But just bear in mind, you probably won't love absolutely every aspect, and that's fine. Is it social? So like I said, is it something you can have with your family or your partner? Is it a case that when you go for dinner, you have to bring your own food in Tupperware? Is it something like that? Like, 'cause again, that's not sustainable. That's not adherable long term. And the last one, is there any health implications? Okay, so again, when you look at something like a vegetarian diet where you are removing an awful lot of protein from the diet, and vice versa, like a carnivore diet where you're very high in protein, you remove an awful lot of like vegetables and carbohydrates and stuff. Like, is there any health implications to going so extreme with one route or one style of diet? So it's a question worth asking. That's kind of why we would always move kind of towards a more balanced and more general approach, as opposed to any like, extreme approach. So like a keto, you are focusing on one macronutrient. You kind of ignore the other two for the most part. Carnivore, you're focusing on just meat, which is primarily protein. Like vegan is primarily just vegetables. You can see how they're leaving out aspects of a balanced diet. And as I said, there is people out there that get on really well with these diets. There is people out there that hate these diets. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Like, if it works for you, then yeah, work it. If it's healthy for you, then yeah, then go with it. You know, like, but just be mindful. Like, is there any health implications to this? Is there anything negative to come from this? Like, there is certain, businesses, or what's the best word, like nutrition kind of coaching, where they focus on everything forming around the scales and getting prizes if you lose certain weight and stuff. But you have to come back and look, like, is there any health implications to the foods they're eating? Okay, I think that's very important, that no matter what diet we undertake, we should be a healthier person on the far side of it. That has to be the priority. And by health, like, obviously body fat or body weight reducing is a part of that, but there's also other parts to that, like our hormones play a huge role in all this. Okay, and understanding that they have to be in balance, and if they're not, then yes, fat loss becomes a part of the problem, but there's much more to it as well. Okay, so that's probably a webinar for another day, but yeah, these 5 questions are really worth asking. So that was different. Just to wrap up, lads, just loads of different roads to getting us to fat loss. It's not particularly that hard. You could be just stuck on a road right now that doesn't suit you. Got to get onto something that works a little bit more for you. It might be counting calories, might be reducing your portion control, and it might be intermittent fasting. It might be trying one of these diets. Okay, is it adherable? Is it sustainable? Do you enjoy it? Is it sociable? And is there any health implications in the short term or the long term? Okay, so they're all questions worth asking. And yeah, hit me up if you got any questions on it, guys. Yeah, thank you very much for tuning in.